the sound of that scratching still wakes me at night. Fearing for my safety, I think I'll never get that horrible sound out of my head. Not after those nights in the forest. I'm going to tell you why the sound haunts me so much. Let this story be a warning to you and anyone who dares venture down that trail. I live in Kansas, and one of my favorite pastimes is hunting. I regularly go on long hikes into the wilderness to take in the beauty of nature, and also to score a good buck. Not only is it a fun activity, it keeps my fridge stocked with fresh meat so I don't have to get that awful store-bought mush. I've been hunting since I was 18, when my dad gave me my first rifle, a hand-me-down from my late grandfather. I've always enjoyed the hunt and consider it a part of my identity. But a few days ago, something happened that made me hesitant to ever go into the woods again. My friend, who will not be named for privacy reasons, lives close to a wildlife reserve. It's one of the most popular spots in the state for hunting, but I actually avoid it since so many people go. And many of them are trophy hunters or trigger-happy rednecks that want to shoot every animal they see. However, last week my friend told me he discovered a secret hiking trail that's been abandoned for years. It's a long trail, taking you a good 10 miles into the woods, even farther than the reserve's boundaries. It's called Arapaho Trail for the Native American tribe that once inhabited the woods. He also told me how the natives told some spooky stories about those woods, and how they are cursed by an evil presence. It got a good chuckle out of me, as I've never been a superstitious person, at least, not yet. On Friday I set out for the reserve, planning on setting up a camp somewhere along the trail. I intended to stay out there the whole weekend. As I walked deeper into the woods and reached Arapaho Trail, I noted how tall the trees were. These were 100-year-old giants, and hardly any had been cut down. A beautiful sight, and sadly not one you see much of nowadays. I continued the hike. The trail was pretty rundown but still manageable. Along the way I saw small ravines and cave openings. One particularly big cave had a half-eaten deer carcass lying outside of it. It didn't startle or surprise me one bit, as coyotes and bears are both common out here. Suddenly though, I picked up on something. The forest was quiet. Not a single bird chirp, or even a frog croak. I tensed, and began to feel I was being watched. I've encountered both bears and coyotes up close, even a pissed-off bobcat once. But this was a different feeling. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as alarms went off in my brain. I whipped my head around to check my surroundings, but I didn't see anything. Then, just as soon as it started, it was over. The forest chorus returned, and I felt the chilling feeling fade away. I breathed a stressed sigh, both relieved and confused. I had never felt that way before in my entire life. It took my breath away and made me feel my life was in danger. After calming down, I chalked it up to possibly being a mountain lion, which are rare but not unheard of in Kansas. After a brief rest, I continued my hike. I scored a jackpot when I found an old hunting cabin about 5 miles down the trail. It was in relatively good condition and had a fireplace already set up. This saved me a great deal of time and effort pitching a tent and setting up a campsite. I got inside and noted how the place was very clean despite not being managed. I put down all my gear except my rifle, then set out around afternoon time to start hunting. I saw a couple dozen coyotes, but no good bucks. I did find a good deer stand, but by then it was already getting dark. I promised myself I'd come back tomorrow. It was only a half-mile away from the cabin, so it wouldn't be hard to find it again. I went back to the cabin, made some s'mores, and fell asleep. I woke up at around 2 a.m. to a weird sound, some kind of scraping or scratching noise from outside the cabin. The blinds to my window were shut, so I couldn't see outside. I got up to open them but hesitated. I remembered the strange feeling I got during the day outside of that cave. Having the gun by my side and the safe feeling of the cabin gave me a confidence boost though. I opened the blinds and shined my flashlight outside. No sign of anything unusual, so I decided to head outside. I figured it was probably a black bear. Curious about the cabin, I did a full walk around the cabin and saw nothing. As I rounded the corner to go back inside, I saw something moving in my peripheral vision. I snapped my flashlight in that direction, but it was already gone. From what I could barely make out of it, it looked brown in color and fairly tall. I realized it was probably just a deer inside in relief, but a part of my mind still worried a mountain lion might be stalking me. The deer carcass and large animal I had just seen were certainly convincing evidence, but there are so few in our state I considered the possibility slim. With that, I went back to bed. The next day, I didn't check the side of the cabin until much later. I had gone back to the deer stand and scored my first buck, and spent the rest of the day cooking and preserving the meat. Once all that was done, I remembered what happened and decided to look again. I was shocked at what I had found. Large claw marks ran across the side of the cabin, right up to my window. They were certainly big enough to be a bear or mountain lion, but didn't really look like either. I also noted the tracks in the dirt, which were large and resembled canine prints more than anything else. This confused me, as they were too big to be a coyote or a fox, and we don't have wolves in Kansas. Eventually, I told myself it was likely a feral dog, refusing to believe any supernatural possibilities as I considered all that nonsense. That night, it began again. The scratching outside the cabin. This time, the familiar creeping fear I had experienced 2 days earlier returned to me. I once again hesitated to open the blinds. And when I did, this time I know I saw something. It moved incredibly fast away from the flashlight, and I couldn't make out any details other than its size and color like last time. Now I was angry. Here I was, a hunter with a loaded gun, cowering from some animal like a scared little rat. I grabbed the rifle and stormed outside in the direction the animal went. About 50 feet into the woods, the nighttime chorus of frogs and crickets ceased. Just like last time, I stopped, flashlight and rifle in either hand, and looked around. I didn't even raise my flashlight in fear of what I might see. Then I saw it. Between two trees about 30 feet to my right were a pair of glowing eyes. They were big eyes, bigger than any animal I'd ever seen, almost looking like lamps. I slowly lifted my shaking hand to shine the flashlight in that direction. And then I finally got a good look at what had been stalking me for 2 days. It was about 4 feet tall and the size of a German shepherd. It had brown fur running across its body, somewhat mangy and torn in some places with what looked like scars. It stood on 4 legs, and its front legs were longer than its back legs, giving it a posture that vaguely resembled a gargoyle. The front paws ended with what looked like hands. I could even see a thumb-type finger. The face was the most terrifying thing, though. It had a canine head, with pointy ears and a long muzzle. It bared its fangs as the light revealed it, but not like a dog would. It almost looked like it was smiling at me. I raised my rifle at it, pointing the barrel right between its 2 huge eyes. Then it did something I'll never forget, something I see in my nightmares every night. It stood on 2 legs. The sight made me back away in pure horror. I felt my heart stop for a solid 5 seconds while I stared at it. I now saw its body in much more detail, and noticed how lanky and thin it was, almost like it was starving. I could even see its ribs as it stood up. Those terrible eyes went higher and higher until it reached its full height. And I kid you not when I say this goddamn thing stood 7 feet tall. A low, rumbling growl echoed from its throat, and it took one long, deliberate step toward me. Now I finally snapped out of my daze, and I shot at the beast with my rifle 3 times. Only one bullet connected in the creature's belly. It let out a shriek of pain and jumped back onto 4 legs with unnatural speed, then tore off into the darkness, screaming the whole time. It sounded like a banshee from hell. I ran as hard as I could back to the cabin, threw together my belongings, and tore down the trail. As I ran, I noted a few things. When I left the cabin, the deer hide and organ pile, both of which I left outside and planned on getting rid of tomorrow, were gone. When I passed the cave on my mad dash back to my truck, the skin and organs were lying outside of it. As I ran, I heard the creature howling in the distance. It was a horrible, painful sound, like a wolf's howl mixed with a man's scream. If you've ever seen the movie American Werewolf in London, it sounded kind of like that. That only made me run faster than I thought any human being could run. I made it to my truck and actually puked from running so hard. As I caught my breath, though, I heard twigs and leaves snapping in the distance. Something was approaching rapidly, and I knew what it was. I whipped my rifle out again and looked around wildly, only for my eyes to stop on a small rocky ledge at the other end of the clearing I parked in. There, on top of the ledge, stood that horrific monster. I could only see its eyes again, tall off the ground as it stood upright, watching me. I didn't lift the flashlight, as I didn't want to risk provoking it. I also didn't want to see its awful smiling snarl again. In the limited moonlight, I could see its outline, and I noticed one hand was covering its bleeding wound. The other hand slowly lifted to a tree next to it. Then it dragged its claws slowly down the bark, producing the same scratching sound that I had heard the past 2 nights. My rifle was pointed at it the whole time. I slowly backed to my truck, opened the door, then jumped inside and revved the engine to life. As the truck started, I saw the creature jump backwards and begin running into the woods. this time on 2 legs. That was the last time I ever saw it, as I floored it out of the clearing. I heard that howl one last time, another sound I'll never erase from my memory. When I got home I couldn't sleep, obviously. So I did some research. I looked up feral dog in wildlife preserve. That got no results. Unknown animal in wildlife preserve. Nothing. Dog monster in wildlife preserve. Just as I was losing hope and beginning to think I was insane. An article stuck out to me. It didn't involve the preserve, but mentioned the Arapaho Native Americans. Curious and out of options. I clicked the link. It brought up a page all about the Arapaho's mythology, the spirits they believed in and such. I scrolled through, then stopped when I hit a few named links for all the different mythical creatures they believed in. One name caught my eye. Dogman. I clicked it and was brought to a page explaining the dogman. Supposedly, it is a wild creature with an insatiable hunger for meat and will track and even hunt humans deep into the woods. The next section had several supposed sightings of the dogman. Apparently the first were in Michigan way back in 1887, but since then or maybe even they, have been reported in most of the Midwest states, including rural parts of Kansas. In fact, a few sightings were only hours away from my house, while they weren't a 100% match with what I encountered. I can't deny the description of the beast was incredibly similar, right down to the smile-like snarl. Seeing that face again in my mind, I quickly had to close the window to prevent from hyperventilating. I know, it sounds silly to be so scared of what sounds like an online ghost story, but after what I witnessed that night, I could never feel the same way. It's been 5 days since I got back home. I never went back to the reserve, not even for some of my belongings I left behind. As far as I'm concerned, they can stay in those god-forsaken woods. I talked to my friend the day after, and he noted how stressed I looked. Did something happen out hunting? He asked. You look like you haven't slept in a week, knowing he'd probably think I was crazy if I told him the truth. I lied. Mountain lion came after me, raked up the side of my cabin and followed me all the way back to my truck. He was shocked as he didn't think there were mountain lions in these parts. However, he got over it quick and simply told me to see him if I needed anything. He's a great friend, best I've ever had, which is why I'm typing this story now, because only 5 minutes ago, I got an email from him. It reads as follows. Yo dude, did you say that mountain lion was clawing the side of your cabin? Because I just heard something outside and my dogs are going nuts barking. I went out to check and there's goddamn claw marks on the side of my house. I think it might have moved down from where you saw it. Maybe it's spooked since you shot at it. I've got my rifle ready in case I need to protect the chickens and dogs. Maybe you should come over with yours too. I now know what I'm going to do. Once I've published this story, I'm getting my rifle and driving to his house. I'm going to tell him the truth, and then we'll both go out there to end this. In case we don't come back, this is my final message. Don't go down the Arapaho Trail. There's something in those woods, something evil.